Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, October 17th. So glad you could join me on this fine afternoon here in north of Houston, Texas. The sun just came out. It really does look nice. I got my coffee here and really looking forward to another critique where we look at all the poems that we receive, what works and what doesn't. Please do leave as many comments as you can as we go in the chat window. People have asked for this. They want to know how to make their poems better. They did so by submitting. Going to rattle.com. Up there in the content window or menu, there's a button for Critique of the Week. You find the place to submit your poems. And then we go over and we try to help each other out, learning more about how to make poems really work, how to make them sing, how to make them memorable. That's what we want to talk about here. The big picture, the little picture, anything else that comes up. We've always got a great crew on hand of wonderful poets and poetry fans. Sharon Ferrante is here, Kimberly Gibson-Tran, Morgan Feeney, Kevin West, Katie Dozier over there in the next office over. We got PMB here, Christina Waywin, Shape of Soup is here, Chelsea McClellan, the reigning prompt poet of the month, Dick Westheimer is here, Holly York, Shauna Bowling, Bryn Pope, had some great poems recently, Bryn did. Shreve Preach Singh is here. Mary Keating, good to see you, Mary. Rachel Grieve is here. Rattle Poetry Prize finalist. Was just looking at her poem, The Wonderful Hyven, as we put together the issue. Emily Arnold Fernandez is here. Amy Dower Solorzano. Hemet Malik, great to see you, Hemet. Rose Lennard is here as well. Clayton Clark. Yeah, Sarah Rashid Khan. Okay, we got a great everybody here. Really wonderful poets. Doug Van Hooser. At this point, I'm going to have to stop reading everybody's names. We got so many people here, but it's wonderful to see you all. And now, if you have a submission in the queue and would like to have your poems go today, say so now. The first person to say that will do first. And then we'll go through the oldest poems in the queue. We've got a lot in the stack. I'm going to have to stop reminding people that they can do this now because we've got 276 submissions in here. It's going to take a while to catch back up. Kevin West, there you go. Kevin West is the great winner. Quick on the draw, thanks, Kevin. And we'll probably do that every time because it's nice to see it. Okay, so let's find Kevin West's poems here. Kevin West, and we'll start there. Then we'll go to the oldest poems in the queue. We'll get to somebody who participates a lot next week too in that. But it's nice to give back to the poets who participate here. Okay. So let's take a look at Kevin West poems. Kevin is from Hamburg, Germany. Oh, wow. So all the way across the pond. He's got two poems for us. It looks like The Deer and Lake in Morning. Let's see, any general comments or questions? Kevin says, could the titles do more work? I tend to title poems straightforwardly. And, of course, any feedback that might improve, polish the poems for submission. Thank you. Okay, well, that's what we're here to do. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. We'll take a look at Kevin's poems. If I little organizing, hang on 1 second. Okay, there. So this is the first poem, The Deer. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson-Tran says I already like the titles. Yeah, well, we'll see. It's always a fun title talk. Titles are one of those things where, after you've gone through the grueling, process of pouring the submission out or the poem out on the page. It's one of those fun things afterward, like little line edits. I always have fun doing that, and titling the poem is always fun too. So that's good to do after the fact. Let's read these poems now and see what they do. The Deer is the first one. We never heard hoof crashes around Webb Lake, not in November, when whitetail crept through leaf fall and bog. Around us distant gun thunder stomped the sky like petulant gods. Crunched between birches, we whispered strategies, the thick backwoods fog foiling hand-signaled plans. Boredom brought us closer rather than force us apart. We balanced an oak wedge atop a mossy blowdown, a bullet casing lending truth to claims we'd fired at least once. Pull back slow, my father's advice, as I shut one eye to aim, but now, years later, I realize he was telling me, don't grow old. Leave gently, not all at once. Only hope steadied his voice in that long, silent moment before it swallowed us whole. Yeah, so Kimberly Gibson Turner mentions mossy blowdown. I like that a lot, and that's one of the things, I think that's one of the best lines in the poem because it's the most sort of unique to this experience. Like, I've never been hunting. My father hunted sometimes. I've eaten the deer meat. We had a whole carcass of a deer in the basement once, and had deer meat hamburgers, but I never went out hunting either. I don't know any of this stuff about, the hand signaling, that kind of thing. But the blowdown is not, there's so many phrases in any kind of like niche field where not everybody's done, not everybody knows. It's really fun to use and really informative and really rich. It makes the poems really, one of those words, muscular or something like that. One of the really strong to use a lot of the actual language that community would use when other people aren't really familiar with that. It makes it feel really vibrant. And so, a mossy blowdown is a great example of something that I would never think to put those words together, but hunters probably do. Yeah. So, So the deer. Yeah, and then Morgan Feeney says, the ending loses me a bit. I can't visualize hope steadying a voice, and I would love more specificity here for what he was hoping for. Yeah, too. And there's some cliches, too, some folks pointed out, and that's where the poem isn't as strong as where the strength is, which I think there's some really great lines, but I think the strength is in those great lines, and then okay. Yeah, Shape of Soup says, too, well done, well placed. Title is fine, puts the focus on the reading experience. Yeah, too. I think there's a lot of different, just to speak about titles generally, too. There are a lot of different things you can do as long as the title is doing something functional, is my opinion. One of the things that's really wonderful to do is think about it like that kind of haiku cut where you have some kind of surprise or turn between the title and the poem itself. And that's a really great thing to do, but you don't always have to do that. Sometimes labeling and guiding attention and not being the focus is a good use of the title. A lot of times it's revealing information that is necessary but not included in the poem. So you want to think like, what could my title add to this poem that's not there? I think that's the general thing you want to think about in terms of titles. And the other thing is, of course, making it, since it's the first thing we read, the most interesting thing we want that appeals to us, that makes us want to read. So that's a thought, and this is a sort of a guiding our attention, staying out of the way, but not too disinteresting. Everybody's interested in deer. There's so much sort of symbolic meaning behind deer. It's a poem that is a simple title. It's something I would still be interested in reading, just seeing the title, which is why people said it's a great title to start with. Yeah, so let's read it line by line. The deer. We never heard hoof crashes around Webb Lake. One thing that happens a lot too, I want to point out, there's a lot of opportunities that are sort of not taken in this little poem to describe things in more detail, like to have a sort of modifying clause and go deeper into that experience that not all of us have of hunting around a lake and thinking, about what deer, hoof crashes sound like. So we never heard hoof crashes around Webb Lake, and we say not in November, but we could instead say we never heard the blah, 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 and describe how that feels and how that would sound, or how the silence might sound, how the absence of it sounds. Like, what do you hear instead? There's a real opportunity in a little moment like that to dig deeper into the scene and make the scene even more vivid. And instead we go to an abstraction which doesn't hold, we say not in November when whitetail crept through leaf fall and bog. And so then when the whitetail crept through leaf fall and bog, like there's another opportunity to describe in more detail, use some kind of metaphor, some kind of language to make us really feel this. The leaf fall and bog is nice in that way. We were talking about the I don't know where it went, the mossy blowdown. Like, it feels like very much we're in the woods and we're in this life, which is great. But you can make us feel this a little bit more by using some kind of metaphor and making that little image a little richer. But the first stanza is nice because it has those details, which are really good. Around us, distant gun thunder stomped the sky like petulant gods. So petulant gods has already been pointed out. It's pretty cliche. And even gun thunder is a different way to say it than the thunder of the guns or something, but that's kind of cliche too. So you want to think of like different ways. If you want to go to this place, think of different ways to say that, I'd say. Winston Munn says there is deer hunter knowledge in this poem that isn't quite passed on to the non-deer hunter reader. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. When our distant thunder stomped the sky like petulant gods, crouched between birches, we whispered strategies. Yeah, the crouch between birches is nice. Whispered strategies work. So we're moving the poem forward with that line. The thick backwoods fog foiling hand-signaled plans. And again, the hand-signaled plans, there's just a lot of opportunities here to get more into detail. Like, what are the hand signals? Can you describe the hand signal gesture? And that would make the poem feel more rich and alive too. So I think that's my main piece of advice coming out of the poem is just going into it's not like going on and belaboring it, but going into slight detail can really help bring the thing to life a little more. Anyway, boredom brought us closer rather than force us apart. And, that line here, gets into the abstraction and we're not feeling it very strongly. How can you show us that again? The specific details about what you would do during, imagine how much richer the poem would feel if instead of hearing boredom brought us closer, we got to see a little bit of some kind of idiosyncratic small thing that you did during the boredom, and that would make the poem be a little bit more vivid too. And get little details like that and then condense the poem down into a structure, and then you have something really strong. We balanced an oak wedge atop a mossy blowdown, a bullet casing lending truth to claims we'd fired at least once. A bullet casing lending truth to claims. So this is a little unclear to me. So in this mossy blowdown, which I imagine is some kind of like blind type thing. Kennedy Gibson Tran is saying bullet casing lending truth is a bit clumsy too. Yeah. And the thing is, and then the idea is that there's a bullet casing there, but was it from this hunt? I think the reason why it feels clumsy is because we don't know is it from an old hunt or is it from like earlier in the day? And it acts like we just found it. So it meant like somebody fired from this location, but when? So we're losing a sort of sense of time because of the way it's phrased. So anyway, some more detail there again too. Pull back slow, my father's advice, as I shut one eye to aim. But not now, years later, I realized he was telling me don't grow old. Let's see. Yeah. Winston Munn says, the one thing I'm missing here is an emotional connection. Where's the Volta? And Jeanette Burmay says, I'm a bit lost at the end. Yeah. So we're sort of trying to move into, trying to make that sort of Volta-like leap with the movement in time. The father saying, pull back slow as I shut one on aim, but then we're moving to years later. So that is the Volta. That's the turn. But now, years later, I realized he was telling me, don't grow old. Leave gently, not all at once. Only hope steadied his voice in that long, silent moment before it swallowed us whole. And again, the swallowed us whole is a cliche too. So we're kind of stumbling through a summary of what we're trying to say, but we haven't really got to what we want to say in a specific way that makes it come to life for us as readers. So there's you can feel there's an emotion there, and we've sort of described it, but as Kimberly Gibson Tran says, cut my father's advice and just keep the line of advice. Yeah, I mean, so if you build the scene a little bit more vividly, like I've been saying, and then let it sort of speak for itself, we'll make a lot more connection to it, which is I think what Kimberly Gibson Tran is saying here. She's saying, cut my father's advice and just keep the line of advice. Let it speak for itself. Again, Rose Lenard says, too, end on an image. Yeah. And Mark Gunner says, I don't see how the pullback slow line leads to Don't Grow Old. And so really the poem, again, is set up nice, and there's some really great lines in it, but lean more into those details, and then find a way to just let those details present what you're saying on the page instead of, it's just that I'm just saying show, don't tell. And we're telling sort of the feeling, and which is why we're not really feeling it. Shape of Soup says the emotion here isn't externalized. I'm not sure it necessarily has to be if the undercurrent is shaped a bit more purposefully. And Rachel Grieve, how does the deer metaphor connect to what the father says? And so how do we bring that around to? Because it is called the deer, which works fine as a title. How is the deer like the speaker in this poem? And why? And that's the thing. It's not really as clear either. It's this pullback slow. Yeah. Well, Elizabeth Brown says this poem could really come alive with more show and less tell. And yeah, I mean, that's just the bottom line. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's nice and succinctly. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. So just some more detail and let the details speak for themselves. And I think the poem is really close. I think it's almost there if we just get those details down. Let's take a look at the second poem. And again, we're going to nature setting, which I always enjoy, like in hiking and all that, even though I don't hunt. Lake in morning. He waited heavy until water caressed a whiskered chin, gone gray in loveless years, finding blind the rough hemp sagging under the waterline, with it dragging birch bark and his young wife ashore, both overturned, waterlogged, punctured by a sharp tug and release, floundering without warmth and weight, filling their curves. His scream rebounded off pine-hidden cabins, returning hollow and thin to ears, burying into a soaked white shift, hoping to hear one heart or that tiny whisper below, only aware of the strained and slow chug of his own. Yeah, so Kimberly Gibson-Trent says rough hemp and waterline are good. So very similar feel in this poem to the other poem, whereas where there are details, they're really great details. But I think having more of the details sort of be the focus and let us sit there, let us come to the meaning, is the sort of general advice in both poems. Shape of Soup says this is great, a little tightening needed. But yeah, and this one is closer than the other one. And notice how, because it leaves the image there, and sort of let the image speak. Cynthia Guntherman doesn't understand the second poem. Let's read it again too, and we'll go line by line. Lake in morning. He waited heavily until water caressed a whiskered chin, gone gray in loveless years. So really nice rhythm in that line too. There's a really nice music to that sort of, there's the water kind of, or the words kind of sigh out of you. And it's a perfect, there's a sort of like downward trend in this line that makes it really evoke the feeling it's trying to evoke, which is nice. He waited heavy until dark water caressed a whiskered chin, gone gray in loveless years, finding blind the rough hemp sagging under the waterline, with it dragging birch bark and his young wife ashore, both overturned, waterlogged, punctured by a sharp tug and release. Floundering without warmth and weight, filling their curves. His scream rebounded off pine-hidden cabins, returning hollow and thin to ears, bearing into a soaked white shift, hoping to hear one heart or that tiny whisper below, only aware of the strained and slow chug of his own. Yeah. And so actually I didn't, I misunderstood the poem actually the first time I was reading through, which happens because I'm sort of reading and thinking about what the details are sometimes. I didn't realize the wife had died at first. And so it is, I think I agree now with whoever's comment that, this, even though I like the tone. So I was first reading it as like love being dead, I guess, and more figurative than she actually drowned. But here we're saying, she actually drowned. And so this opening does feel off as far as the tone. Like I like it, the rhythmic nature of it going into a different poem, but I think it does feel like it doesn't quite fit. Like so much, it's such a tragedy going on. I mean, the boat overturned and the wife drowned and he's pulling her dead body out of the water. I mean, that's a serious thing. And it's not, and I guess maybe it lulled me into not realizing what it was thinking about, even with the screams. Yeah. Yeah, and Hamet Malik says, "Oh, I just realized in the second read." Yeah, I mean, my first interpretation, I thought that the boat had overturned and he was finding her, and then there was some kind, and then he was screaming, be like, "Where is she?" And I thought she was there. I thought she came up, and so it's a very different kind of poem. And I guess So Hal York says, "Loveless years, loveless before she died." Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, those first lines lull us. That's what Clayton Clark says. It took a second read for me, too. And it's because that first line lulls us into a different kind of poem. Yeah. Jamie Thomas says, "I didn't get she drowned on the first read either, but I still think it might feel more urgent with a man telling his own story instead of an observer." I agree, too. Yeah, so Morgan Fee says, "But why loveless before she died?" And that's the thing that sort of threw me off. Yeah. It just seems such a weighty and huge event to be talked about such quickly in such a short poem. So Emily Arnold Fernandez says, "I'm envisioning that the man's wife has been vanished for years, and suddenly years later he finds her body." Yeah, Brian O'Sullivan says, "I kind of like the contrast of the lulling lines and the nature scenery with catastrophe." And, that's a good point, Brian. And I think one of the problem with the poem is, given how heavy it is, that, the wife drowns. It's sort of, it's in between two modes. Like if you really leaned into that, how did you put it? I was going too fast. What did Brian say? Yeah, the lulling lines. That's how we put it. The nature scenery. If we wrote the whole thing in that sort of lulling tone with the nature, and yet this tragic thing, the contrast of that, being completely stark. It's like some of the scariest movies in Halloween season, are the ones that, they don't show the monster, that all you see is like a flicker of a shadow, but you never see what it actually is. And having that kind of, that's where the fear kind of lives. And having this be told really stark and distant from this position the whole way through might actually work better. And in which case his screams rebounding off pine-hidden cabins, returning hollow to thin years, burying, all that stuff, that the drama of that not being muted at all makes it so that maybe that's what's off, where it doesn't go all the way into that contrast where I think the poem would work. It's sort of in between two. It's in between being dramatic and really, really like extremely understated. And I think maybe picking one or the other. I mean, my first impulse was to say that this poem should be longer with more detail and from the first person telling us this story. But if you wanted to have such distance, I could also imagine a way to go with this where we have such distance and such lulling contrast, as Brian put it, that we're like, you could feel the emotional remove because it's like too much emotion to even express. And so it's like so restrained that that's even more powerful. So I think those are the two directions to go. But right now it's sort of existing in the between realm where it's not doing enough of either. Yeah. Phil Hall says, too little info to know the story the author is trying to tell us. Nice music occasionally, but not anchored well enough. Maybe because it's told at a remove into the first person. Yeah, exactly. So, either more in the first person or keep that lulling tone the whole time. So we're sort of shocked by what's going on in a way that, a lot of times when terrible events happen, you are like, as if you're out of your own body watching the thing happen. And it, things slow down and it's a strange sort of mental state that you get in, but you could be creating that in the poem. I think that would work really well too. So it could go either way. Yeah. Rose Leonard points out too, if he is screaming, would his heart really chug slow? Surely it would race. And that could be playing with that, that that time slowing down and like feeling detached from the trauma that you're witnessing in the moment, which I think would be a cool thing, for a poem to evoke. Yeah. So anyway, a lot of great suggestions too. A lot more that I haven't read in the comments, but thanks for sharing these. And again, I think, the strength, there's really nice rhythm to the lines and nice detail. Lean into those, focus on even more of those nuanced details that you have. And I think I think that'll work out. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. One more thing worth noting. Danette Burmia says, I think some stanza breaks might help this out too. And yeah, that might slow it down. It feels, so much happens. And I think it's maybe like a kind of a whiplash from being sort of lulled into this, think we're talking about aging and, and that kind of thing. And then the real traumatic scene. And it comes really fast because it's all sort of in one stanza, which is like one paragraph, which is like one nugget. So spreading out and making it, 3-line stanzas, it kind of slows it down mentally. Even if you read them pretty much at the same pace, it still has a more of a feel of white space and air around it, so we can take it in a little more slowly. So maybe that might help too. But this is one where I would definitely tell more of the story in a more dramatic way the whole way through, or pull back and tell less. And it's not really about crafting this individual one down in this shape. I think it's sort of got the wrong shape. Whereas the last one just needed to make the turn more vivid and sort of end on the image of it that we can understand symbolically. This one, I think, has to go in one direction or the other and be a sort of a total rewrite, but some great lines to save and a topic to talk about. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, thanks so much. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was Kevin West. So thanks for sharing that, Kevin. Now we're going to take a look at another poem. And we're just going to go to the oldest poems in the queue, see how many we can get through in the next half an hour or so. I just have to... Okay. So the oldest poem, we're still in March 17th. The Pacific. Here we go. And this is... Alan Swope from Oakland, California. No general questions, 2 poems, sort of typical shortish poem length. Well, relatively short. Here we go. The Pacific. The Pacific. Let me die in perfect health, I joked, but I meant it. I see it unfolding like this. In a fitness room with treadmills humming, I'm heaving back on the tethered bar of the rowing machine, toes in straps, eyes strained forward, earbuds filled with Mahler's Adagietto. A warrior in Nikes in a battle with time. Surrounded by family and friends, exercising delts and pecs, red bandanas dark with sweat, gym togs decorated like banners of heraldry. I slip out, towel around my neck. Moments later, my wife finds me in the lounge, very still, eyes closed, hands in my lap, serene smile as if I were a yogi. My chair pointed toward the hills and bridges of San Francisco Bay, where my gaze had just, moments ago, been fixed on a spot, light years beyond the Pacific. Yeah, so, a lot of really great lines and details in this poem. I think a little bit of cleaning up. And one line, so Kimberly Gibson Trent says she likes a warrior in Nikes in a battle with time. That one took me out of the poem, even though it was a good line. It doesn't feel like it fits with the rest of the sort of the tone of the rest of the poem. It's a little too, I don't know what's the word. Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading while talking, which is never a good idea. It has a little bit more, I don't know what the word is. Let's read the poem again. The Pacific. Let me die in perfect health, I joked, but I meant it. And so one of the things I would cut is this. We have a little bit too much, I guess there's a chattiness kind of that interjects itself. And it leaves the poem not as stark as like the dark humor and sort of fun of it wants it to be, it feels to me. And so, yeah. Yeah. Oh, and Amy Dower Slorsner already said I would maybe cut I see unfolding like this. Yeah. So this kind of thing, and I think that's why for me, the Warrior Nikes is a little bit too much of a narrator interjecting in sometimes there's like a movie where like the scene is like playing itself out and you're really engaged, and all of a sudden this narrator tells you what you're looking at. That's kind of what those two moments feel like. Whereas like we're already in the poem and it takes us out of place having too much of a narrator involved. And so if there was, and if again, there's so many times this is the case, but if you were doing it regularly, like often, as like a part of a thing, it would fit. But because it's only a couple times that sort of voice creeps in, it just feels out of place. So anyway, so I would cut that. And it sounds fine like this. Let me die in perfect health. I joked, but I meant it. In a fitness room with treadmills humming, I'm heaving back on the tethered bar of the rowing machine. Someone pointed out you don't need the on, which I agree, but I love heaving back the tethered bar of the rowing machine. Like that's the kind of thing we were talking about with the last poem. Those kind of details, the toes and straps, eyes straight forward, we're building up with really specific details. Like I don't use a rowing machine, so I love hearing that described really concisely and tightly and imagistically. I think that really works. I'm heaving back on the tethered bar of the rowing machine. Eyes trained forward, earbuds filled with Mahler's Adagietto. But then a warrior in Nikes and a battle with time. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the thing. If we just skip this though, earbuds filled with Mahler's Adagietto, surrounded by family and friends, exercising delts and pecs, red bandanas dark with sweat. Again, the bandana is a great detail. Gym togs, I don't even know what togs are, but I love that. Gym togs decorated like banners of heraldry, I love that too. I slip out, towel around my neck. Moments later, my wife finds me in the lounge, very still, eyes closed, hands in my laps. Smile, serene smile as if I were a yogi. I think the serene smile as if I were a yogi is a little bit cluttery. I could condense that into just the image. The serene smile of a yogi, you could say that. My chair pointed toward the hills and bridges of San Francisco Bay where my gaze... Nice sounds, too. There's real music to this. The bay and the gaze, that little off-rhyme in the middle internally. There's a lot of that throughout the poem and a lot of nice alliteration. There's a lot of nice, like, subtle but good wordplay. Where my gaze had just moments ago... And it's nice, too, a lot of times the little asides are distracting, but I think that slows it down really nicely, where my gaze had just moments ago been fixed on a spot, light years beyond the Pacific. I'm not sure of light years, but even just far beyond the Pacific maybe, but the light years, I don't know, maybe that works. I don't know. So Bryn Pope says, I feel so unqualified to offer advice. No one's unqualified to offer advice. You just say what you think. Anyway, but I want to know what caused this person to go to the lounge and stare into the Pacific. Yeah. Mary Keating would delete the last stanza and end on my hands in my lap, the yogi smile. Now, I think I like the Pacific. I like ending there. And the mystery of what we're wondering about, it's one of those poems. There's different like ways poems can land and sort of keep you there. And, sometimes it's like a conclusion. It's like, ba-bam, that's what the poem is about, and this is the revelation. And sometimes, like in this one, I think it's tight and concise enough with good enough details that mulling over that we don't really know what was in the Pacific. But thinking about that, I think is a good ending. And so, past the Pacific, says Winston Munn. Yeah, that might be better. My problem is just light years is actually a specific unit, and it's so far, but like that it's not infinite also feels wrong. So it's just like a little too precise in a way that it doesn't need to be precise in that moment. So maybe past the Pacific is better. Let's see. Oops, sorry. I don't know why it's doing this hand. Okay. Brian O'Sullivan says, maybe the poet should turn up the Nike Warrior stuff and do more of the over-the-topness if the idea is that he's imagining an idealized death. Yeah, that's another suggestion too. If you want to go in that direction, it's always more of the thing that's working or not at all. And so that comes up very often. But anyway, I like that. Talking about the title is the Pacific. And I mean, maybe there's a way to get a warrior in Nikes and a battle with time into that title. I don't think that's a really good title though. But anyway, I think cutting it down, just trimming the fat, just a little bit, and having it be a nice, tight, concise poem that leaves you thinking about what's out there in the Pacific that he would have been fixed on. I think it's interesting. It's a nice place to end off. So just tightening it up is my opinion of this poem, and we mentioned the lines I would. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Tran says title feels like a missed opportunity. Yeah, it's not doing much, and we're ending on the Pacific too. Yeah. So what? Morgan Finney says, what if the title were Mahler's I wish I could say this, but Adagietto. Yeah, that's a good idea. And then we could pull that out of the poem, and the fact that a lot of people would trip over that, like I do, would not be an issue because it's in the title. I think that's a good title. Okay. So Michael Antrobus says there's a huge difference between Mahler and Beethoven. If you've ever listened to Mahler, you know how funny it is to be listening to that. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah, we'll keep coming with the title suggestions. But yeah, I think we'll move on to the next poem. And the next one is Wolf Moon. So here we go, Wolf Moon. The older... Here, let me take a sip of coffee. Wolf Moon. The older I grow, the greater my craving for each full moon gorging with radiance. Its waxing lures me like a sunrise's slow reddening. I revel in its ancient promise that even the gloomiest night can be made bright by an invisible sun, like the alchemist turning lead to gold. Old age is a time of creeping shadows. My outer edges have begun to blur, but the full moon still thrills my core. I'm an old wolf howling, keening for more light, more light. So another short poem, and again, I think there's an interesting nugget here that I really like. It's in the second stanza. I revel in its ancient promise that even the gloomiest night can be made bright by an invisible sun, like an alchemist turning lead to gold. I think that's a really nice way to think about it. And with all the moon poems, I've never really heard... Yeah, as Christina Nueven says, I love an invisible sun. I've never heard anybody talk about sort of the miracle that the sun that we can't see is still illuminating the moon. Given all the moon poems, and that's really described well. Like it's kind of alchemy that even in its absence, it can light up the night. Is really cool. And I do like also the Sidney Gunterman says, I love the ending of Wolf Moon. Yeah, there's something about the wolf howling, an old wolf howling, that works too. And I wonder if maybe, could an old wolf howling sort of be the title, and we could sort of get concisely just focus on the second stanza and this idea. But I think Wolf Moon is a good title too. Yeah, Elizabeth Brown says that too. I like that. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those, we haven't said this in a while, which we say all the time. We used to say very often. But I think that the poem in here is actually a haiku. And you can make a wonderful haiku about, the alchemist and the moon and the invisible sun, or maybe Tonka. Maybe it leaves a little bit more room. But, yeah. Yeah. Let me read it one more time. The older I grow, the greater my craving for each full moon gorged with radiance. And again, I think gorged with radiance I would cut. If we could, craving the full moon, I think works. And if we could keep it tight, I think maybe we could have the same structure of the poem and still have it work. Its waxing lures me like a sunrise's slow reddening. And, sunrises are a bit trite in poems and it doesn't really add too much. But craving each full moon is an interesting premise. I revel in its ancient promise that even the gloomiest night can be made bright. Again, there's a nice internal rhyme there. By an invisible sun, like the alchemist turning lead to gold. And then another internal rhyme right after that. Old age is a time of creeping shadows. So the creeping shadows is kind of dull and cliche-ish. My outer edges have begun to blur. And that's a little bit hard to see, no pun intended. Maybe this could be described in more clarity. But the full moon still thrills my core, and my core is a bit cliche. I'm an old wolf howling, keening for more light, more light. And I like that part. So I do like the last two lines. So we can make a really tight, concise poem out of the second stanza and the last two lines, maybe. So Cindy Gunderman says, Wolf Moon, the alchemist in me howls. It's very nice, yeah. Katie Scruggs Galloway says, I would like more wolf-centered details, like I need help identifying with the wolf's hunger and craving. Yeah. Shivpreet Singh says, this is from Anthony Hecht. More light, more light. Oh, that's interesting. That did sound familiar. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then, but as Katie Scruggs Galloway says, more details. If we're going to go, again, I guess this just keeps happening. There's a way you can tighten a poem into being a really tight, concise thing, like a haiku, with a cut. Don't make it 5-7-5, please. Make it a two leap, two worlds in one breath if you make it a haiku. But there's a way that a lot of poems can be condensed down into one thought that very short, and there's some wonderful poems like let me pull up just a really short poem. What's that one? Who wrote the? Let me see. I gotta look up. Playground. Oh. I can't remember who wrote this poem, so I'm trying to. It's a Latino poet. What was his name? Ah, man. And it's not coming up on Google. Because I don't want to always go to Mike White for the super short poems. What is that poem? Fingers. I think it's Jose. It was about wearing his father's glove. Dang it. I just can't find it. Anyway. But having a really tight, concise poem can really work. And so a lot of times there's one good idea in a poem. And if you can compress that down into like a jewel, then you have a great poem. Or there's the one idea that you can expand upon and dig even deeper and spread out and explore in more territory. And so often that's the case between the two poems. God, I don't know why I can't remember that. And it's not coming up on Google who that poet was. No. And maybe if somebody can remember the poem. Yeah. Well, anyway, we will move on. I'm sure the poem I'm thinking would come to me. I thought it was just called Gloves, and it's not coming up on Google. Oh, well. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. That was, once again, Alan Swope, sharing that from California. Next, let's take a look at another poet. Got time for one or two more. And next up we have Bethany Sullivan. And Bethany, no general questions, 2 poems. Again, not too long. They're kind of double-spaced-ish, so the fact that they're... Well, the second one's kind of long, but we'll see. We'll see what we got. No general questions. So the first poem is To Strike Gold. Here we go, To Strike Gold. Again, this is Bethany Sullivan from Washington State. Yeah. Okay. To Strike Gold. Behind the tinted glass, she hunches, feverishly scraping a sweaty dime into the flaked layer of gold paint on the glitzy card. Cloaked in shadow, craning for a little parking lot light, the paint scritches away, coating her quick-bitten nails and drifting to join the murmuration that has turned the car mat into casino carpet. She digs the dime into the paint, while in another time, another place, a man crunches gravel into the skin of his knees at the bank of some stream, his makeshift tin stirring up silt and stone. His back curls and his hips cramp, but still he sifts, fingertips bleeding, knuckles cracked, knees worn through. The eye unblinking in the driver's side door is not tinted enough to keep her foraging form a secret. She tears the card to toss it among the growing nest for warmth. On the passenger side, she swipes the dime on her pant leg, decorating herself with gold. She produces another trinket, lit by the sallow street lamp filtering through the windshield. Behind the tinted glass, she hunches. Yeah, so much gold today, says Rachel Grieve. Yeah. Yeah, Morgan Feeney says, cloaked in shadow feels a bit cliche, but liking the vivid images. Yeah, the poem ends, it just ends here in the file. It's definitely the end, but it ends on a comma instead of a period, which makes me wonder if there was more and it was an edit. But yeah. Yeah, Lisa Seidenberg says sallow street lamp is nice. Elizabeth Brown, I think we get the comparison without going to the man by the stream. Yeah, so my first impression of the poem was, I think I like the details, nice language. Yes, Jamie Thomas says nice language. But it goes to that the man in the bank back in time, which is an interesting sort of movement, but we don't really do anything with it. So I think the poem could either, again, I guess this is the theme for today, it could lean into that and develop that in more detail. Assume that the fact that your subconscious wanted to go there, assume that there was something there, and put that, and explore it more, or cut it out because it's unnecessary if you want to just focus on the central figure in the poem. Yeah, but let's take a look more closely. To strike gold. Behind the tinted glass, she hunches. And I guess we repeat that last line. I guess that's what the last line is. Feverishly scraping a sweaty dime into the flaky layer of gold paint on the glitzy card. There's one thing. The line break here made it a little difficult to read. The gold paint on the glitzy card. It really, there's a natural, syntactic break after paint and before of. And having it sort of be in the middle of gold modifying paint, sometimes you can play with that and people say, oh, wonderful enjambment, but a lot of times that just breaks the pacing of the poem, makes it harder to read. So, yeah. And Michael Antrobus says, try reading it without all the adjectives. You might find it's just as powerful scraping a dime. And that's another great point. There doesn't need all that many, and adverbs, especially as Kimberly Gibson Tran points out. Yeah, let the images speak for themselves. Because really what you're doing when you're adding adverbs and adjectives is sort of trying to insert, especially adverbs, inserting the emotion in that the readers are supposed to get to feel ourselves on our own. So you want the images that you're using to evoke those adjectives without having to say them. And so putting them in always feels like you're letting us down a little bit and again, it's just the show don't tell. It's telling us how to feel instead of letting us feel that way on our own, which is much more powerful. So behind the tinted glass, she hunches, scraping a dime into the flaked layer of gold paint on a glitzy card. Much better. I do like the gold paint on a glitzy card. That sometimes the glitzy is nice because it focuses a little bit more on that. Yeah. Okay, anyway, keep going. Cloaked in shadow. Cloaked in shadow is a bit cliche. Craning for a little parking lot light. The paint scritches away, coating her quick bitten nails, and drifting to join the murmuration that has turned the car mat into casino carpet. And so I really like the description of the A little cluttery again. The scritches maybe. Yeah, but I like the flakes off the scratch off ticket, sort of turning the car mat into a casino carpet. I think that's a really nice image too, and just the playing with that's fun. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, she digs the dime into the paint, and we called it paint before, and so that leaves us a little, or twice before, right? We call it paint up here, paint there, and then paint there. So it's a lot of like repetition that's not adding anything. And I think, this is already happening right now too. So she digs into the dime into the paint well in another time. Just cut all this and just jump right into in another time. And then in another time, another place, a man crunches gravel. In another time, another place is a cliche too. Just a phrase that just, it doesn't, it chunks together so it doesn't have as much impact. So just cutting this, just say, another time, a man crunches gravel into the skin of his knees on the bank of some stream, his makeshift tin stirring up silt and stone. And so there's a real nice poetic ear for language on display in the best lines of this poem, and that's a great example. It really flows out because of the alliteration, because there's a way that it uses the rhythm to its advantage. And feels natural, but also musical at the same time. So an ear for poetry is something this poet definitely has. Of stream, at the bank of some stream, his makeshift tin stirring up silt and stone. His back curls and his hips cramp, but still he sifts, fingertips bleeding, knuckles cracked. So the fingertips bleeding, knuckles cracked, a bit cliche. Like, find some new way. Like the casino carpet is a totally fresh image. Find some way to say that. The eye unblinking in the driver's side door. So we go back to the present. The eye unblinking in the driver's side door is not tinted enough to keep her foraging form a secret. I don't know. I like the idea. I like the concept of comparing this, the panning for gold for the scratch off ticket. I like that comparison. I like the idea of like overlaying it too. I think it's a good concept for a poem. But handled, the transitions are handled a little clunkily too. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says having an ear for poems is a gift. Yeah, it's a gift you get by actually reading poems, which too many people don't actually do. So, anytime I hear a person who comes up with a line like that, just flows out naturally in the music of speech, I think, oh, they read poems, which is, it just seems like it's faint praise, but so many people just don't actually read poems, and they just want to be, writing them and getting a pat on the back. So read, and you'll have a voice like this too, because that's you internalize, and really you're making a large language model for the music of speech yourself in your own brain, and that's what happens when you read a lot. Anyway, the eye unblinking in the driver's side door is not tinted enough. This is a little bit confusing. I don't know how much we don't usually go into this much detail, but the eye unblinking in the driver's side door is not tinted enough. So it's her own eye in the door? I'm a little confused about where the eye is, and the tinting is the door, but it's written as if the eye is tinted, which is a little confusing and just sort of a mistake, I guess. It's not tinted enough to keep her foraging form a secret. But again, her foraging form a secret is nice music. She tears the card to toss it among the growing nest for warmth on the passenger side. See, the growing nest feels out of place too. She swipes the dime on her pant leg, decorating herself with gold. And I like putting the gold on herself is cool too. She produces another ticket, lit by the sallow street lamp filtering through the windshield. Behind the tinted glass, she hunches. Yeah. And so, condensing it down and coming back, I think, too, to the minor panning for gold. We have that one run where we went off into the past, but I think the past needs to come back again too. Yeah. Okay. Brandon Pope says, I really think the poem got cut off. Yeah, it might have. Yeah. but it's definitely what was sent. Anyway, let's move on. So we got some good suggestions there. Let's take a look at this, and it's a little longer, but it is double spaced and short lines. So let's see how it goes. Block. At the long end of a short town, past the barley and the milk stand, past the driveway with a broken ice cream truck that only moves when old man Craig Bentley needs a new case of beer, in the crinkled furrow of that last cul-de-sac towering above, the roadies so dry and heavy they don't whisper in the gray but creak, a street lamp flicks itself to life, or flits it, sorry. The gray but creak, a street lamp flicks to life. It isn't quite dark. Jalen's still at the stadium, tossing and kicking and catching until his arms are too sore to work out the day's problems on Mrs. Krakow's take-home quiz. But the daylight sensor senses false night beneath a doughy glob of fallen oak, leaves glued to the hood of the fixture. The blob murmurs with unclenched teeth, the cicada faking quiet. Craig pulls in beneath a yawning sky, and his truck mumbles but does not sing. The light does not reach him. His wife does not come to the door. The sky traipses from gray to grayer as the sun somewhere behind retires. Jalen returns, half-pumped football in hand, in air in hand. A secret street lamp whispers to light beyond a corner he can't see. Atop one he can, the wet mess dries, congeals, cures. When the clouds turn back to gray next morning, the light behind the corner blinks off. The one in the cul-de-sac does not. The one in the cul-de-sac shines on nothing by day, on little by night, as the great star makes its hidden rounds. Until one night, long after Jaden loses the homecoming game and Mrs. Bentley drives off in the station wagon, leaving Craig with the only faulty ice cream truck at the long end of a longer poem, past the school and the corner store, in the brow of the last cul-de-sac, above the rhododendron skeleton, a street lamp snicks, its eye asleep, leaving a small burnt filament in a cage of weatherproof glass. It rains, the cul-de-sac is dark, the last of the papier-mâché leaves melts from the daylight sensor, the light does not return. Yeah. So, again, wonderful sounds and rhythms in this poem, great details, but as Burmy says, I've lost interest. Yeah. Yeah, so as Morgan Phoenix says, I think the poet should read the work aloud. There are places where the rhythm really works and places where it falters, which I agree with too. It just sort of, it hits and misses and goes on too far, too long. There's some really great runs of poetry, really great, both details and music. And then other places, it kind of goes on too far with that. And my attention drifts. Yeah. Yes. Shape of Soup says also a bit narratively heavy and sonically interesting, but distractingly rough. Yeah. Jesse A says could really see the details, but it goes on too long. It was actually my feeling too. And again, I think some of the line breaks make it rough to read. I think I'll point out one. Maybe we'll read the poem slowly again one more time, and we'll stop as we go. Block. At the long end of a short town, past the barley. So when we get this run of pasts, that's a really nice list and a rhythmic list too. Past the barley and the milk stand, past the driveway with a broken ice cream truck that only moves when old man Craig Bentley needs a new case of beer. So that great details. I love the ice cream truck that only moves when the old man wants a case of beer. The line break on ice cream. There's another one later down. We'll see, where it breaks in the middle of sort of a syntactic unit, and it's fine because it adds to the rhythm. Here, breaking the ice cream is just, it's sort of needlessly clunky, and you don't really gain anything by breaking that up, Like you have that, I didn't realize it was going to ice cream, that surprise that enjambment can allow for a second, but there's no payoff to that. And so, yeah. So that's an issue there. So line breaks, just more clean line breaks will help the music come to life. Yeah. And as everybody's saying, in the general overview, Morgan Feeney, the title doesn't do much for me. What is this poem for? Why write it? Why read it? It's so long I'm losing the point. Beautiful images, but give me a reason to care. And I think that's a good, we got to hone that in and figure out the purpose for the poem being written. And the title, there really does not sure what it does. So we'll read though. I shouldn't have stopped. But I like the opening though, except for that line break. I think it works. It works well to introduce the scene. In the crinkled furrow of that last cul-de-sac, towering above the roadies so dry and heavy. It took me a minute to realize roadies were rhododendrons, which I just maybe say the whole word there. And they don't whisper in the gray, but creak. A street lamp flicks to life. And I like that too. I think Brian O'Sullivan mentioned that was too much, even though we liked the last one. I like the flick, because that is how they, at least certain kinds. I think they're the, I can't even remember, but the sodium, is that what it is? The street lights? But they have that like flicking to turn on. And, Shape of Soup says fun language sounds are not a through line. Yeah. Mary Keating says, Tim, what's your take on the double-spaced lines in a poem? I think I just assume that it's the formatting in the document and that they're not supposed to be double-spaced. And I don't even mention this to the point where I don't even mention this to the poet. If we publish the poem, I will just send you your like proof and release as if it's not supposed to be double-spaced. And then someone occasionally will say, hey, I want these lines double-spaced. And I will say, why? Like, explain why. Sodium vapor lights, that's what I'm thinking of. Thanks, Doug Hauser. Yeah. But, and then I think maybe like once or twice in the history, someone has said, oh, yeah, they're double-spaced for this reason, and I want them to be, and it made sense, and so we did it. But mostly, the formatting, it's like the font choice in the layout, the kerning between letters and stuff, the typesetting of a poem, that's like the publisher's job, and you shouldn't play with it, I mean, people ask for manuscripts of prose to be double-spaced as the tradition because you can make line edits in between, and that's worth it for a submission, and some people just submit that way because they've submitted fiction that way for so long, and that's what I assume it is when things are double-spaced. So, anyway, I haven't really, it's hard to think of scenes. We have one poem that I can think of that was intentionally double-spaced. And it was by Anis Mojgani. And it was a very short poem and it worked. And I think there's one, Roberta Beery has a sonnet not a sonnet, a haibin, where the prose section are double-spaced lines. And that works because you kind of want a flicker around it. But, anyway, I think it's rarely the point or intentional, and I would assume that here. So I would just single space this. And while I'm rambling, Dick Westheimer says, question, Tim, could you talk about the trade-off between breaking lines in the wrong place in service of visual symmetry or for the best enjambment? Yeah, so let me read, because I think the next stanza has a line where I think the unusual break works in a weird way. And so let me just keep going first. In the crinkled furrow of that last cul-de-sac, towering above the roadies so dry and heavy they don't whisper in the gray but creak, a street lamp flicks to life. It isn't quite dark. Jalen's still at the stadium, tossing and kicking and catching until his arms are too sore to work out the day's problems on Mrs. Krakow's take-home quiz. But the daylight sensor... Did I miss it? Sorry. But the daylight sensor... senses false night beneath a doughy glob of fallen oak, leaves glued to the hood of the fixture. The bulb murmurs with clenched teeth, the cicada faking quiet. Craig pulls in beneath the yawning sky, and his truck mumbles but does not sing. The light does not reach him, his wife does not come to the door. The sky traipses from gray to grayer as the sun somewhere behind retires. Jalen returns half-pumped, football in hand, in air in hand. A second street lamp whispers to light beyond a corner he can't see. Atop the one he can, the wet mess dries, congeals, cures. When the clouds turn back to gray next morning, the light behind the corner blinks off. The one in the cul-de-sac does not. The one in the cul-de-sac shines on nothing by day, on little by night, as the great star makes its hidden rounds. So this was actually sorry it took so long to get here. But the, normally we would say the right here, like don't end on a article. But there's a way that if you do that frequently enough, as a regular part of the poem, it adds a kind of velocity to the reading, and it's sort of, and a little bit of like off-kilteredness that doesn't interfere with your comprehension of the meaning of the poem. And so that's a way, if you do it regularly with stuff like that, I think that really can work. And sometimes, like burying rhymes and moving things around and keeping the poem feeling kind of casual, it can work. And it does help to have the poems, the poem feels better to read when there's a consistency and a pattern to the lines. So I think, in places like that, it works. So again, Dick's question was, could you talk about the trade-offs between breaking lines in the wrong place in service of visual symmetry, breaking for the best enjambment? And so one of the things, though, compare this, the great, on little by night, as the great star makes its hidden rounds. Compare that to very at the top, the driveway with the broken ice cream truck that only moves. It makes it hard to read. The fact that you broke here, you conjure the image of ice, or the concept of ice, and then you get to cream and it changes it. And in a poem that's like paced like this and not doing wordplay on that level, it really pulls you out of the poem to have the meaning itself being jammed, if that makes sense. The other one, where it's the and then something else, only changes the cadence, and it doesn't change the cadence where it introduces ambiguity. I guess that's a problem too, because the order of the words we use in English determines a lot of the meaning in ways we don't really think much about. And so here, the driveway with the broken ice cream truck that only moves, it makes it hard to read because there's a break in the syntax after truck. And so it ends up being a really bad line break here because this throws off your reading of this whole line and your understanding of the meaning of the line. Whereas in the example down at the bottom where it just breaks the convention, but it doesn't really distract or do anything wrong. I guess this is a different one. But the, above the rhododendron skeleton, a street, and that just makes it feel like you're not following the rules and you're letting it go free, but it doesn't actually mess up your reading of anything to put a line break like that. So I think really the key, just going on and on about this, is to read your poems out loud, like someone suggested before, and actually feel how the lines are read based on how they're presented. And notice where the way you've presented the poem on the page trips you up, and don't let yourself and readers be tripped up by that. And then also there's the concept of that enjambment surprising you as you turn the corner and, it's not around the corner what I expected. There's a way that that's useful, and there's a way that can be distracting and completely meaningless and detract from the poem instead of add to it. And there's this way that, people are taught and told, having great enjambment that twists the meaning around is really something poets should do, but it should be in service of what the poem is trying to do, or else it's just a distraction. And so there's no reason at the top where we want to put ice, have us think of ice before we think of the cream and realize that it's ice cream and not just ice, and like breaking the ice. If you had like a monoku, broken ice cream is a nice way to play with the language there. But this is a bigger poem. You're trying to create this whole world out of it. And I think that gets in the way instead of helping. So there's that aspect too. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's a lot of talk about that. In general, I just agree with everybody's concept. I guess we have to read the whole thing. We haven't finished. So there's this Jalen figure. I guess part of it is I don't know why I'm supposed to care about Jalen. I like the details when it's kind of like that. the Spoon River anthology, and it's like different people appearing. Where it's Miss Krakow, and it's the Craig Bentley who only drives the ice cream truck when he wants more beer. When it's those like one-off details, and it's a throwaway character, but Jalen returns, and it makes me wonder why Jalen is important. What's the relationship? And I think that's one of the reasons why there's no payoff. Yeah, but I do want to keep reading. So where did I leave off? Yeah. Okay, let's start with Jalen here. Well, I don't want to read all that again. The light does not reach him. His wife does not come to the door. The sky traipses from gray to grayer as the sun somewhere behind retires. Jalen returns, half-pumped, football in hand, in air, in hand. A second street lamp whispers to light beyond a corner he can't see. Atop the one he can, the wet mess dries, congeals. So we're really focusing on the street light and why sometimes it's turning on and not. When the clouds turn back to gray next morning, the light behind the corner blinks off. The one in the cul-de-sac does not. The one in the cul-de-sac shines on nothing by day. So it's an interesting detail, but why is Jalen here, and why are we focused on this? The one in the cul-de-sac shines on nothing by day, on little by night, as the great star makes its hidden rounds, until one night, long after Jalen loses the homecoming game, and Mrs. Bentley drives off in the station wagon, leaving Craig with the faulty ice cream truck. So maybe, we've lost track of who's who and why. So Craig is the ice cream truck guy, and yeah. At the long end of a longer poem, at least it's self-referential and knows it's getting long, past the school and the corner store and the brow of the last cul-de-sac, above the rhododendron skeleton, a street lamp snicks, its eye asleep, leaving a small burnt filament in a cage of weatherproof glass. Again, great descriptions of that. It rains, the cul-de-sac is dark, the last of the papier-mâché leaves, melts. Again, this is another place where the line break would be better up here, just because the leaves melts you trip over that, having them crammed together at the beginning of the line. Anyway, the last of the papier-mâché leaves melts from the daylight sensor. The light does not return. Yeah. Morgan Feeney says, I do sort of like the breaking of the fourth wall in the longer poem line. Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of the poem. But yeah, we sort of get lost in the details. The poem just ends up being too long. There's these three characters that we see briefly, and I think of them as sort of part of the scenery, and then they come back and we're supposed to know and care about them, but we haven't seen them enough to know. Yeah. Chelsea McClellan says a longer poem like this could really benefit from making sure we're situated in setting and re-situating us when you move from one setting to another. That's part of why I get lost. Yeah. Oh, Rachel Greer says, personally, I don't need 3 snicks. I agree. I think just snick would be better. But I do like the description of that sound. Yeah. Yeah. But I see, so just to summarize, I think that we have the street lamp becomes its own character. The Jalen is a character, the Mrs. whatever her name is was a character, and the ice cream truck guy was a character. So we basically have 4 characters in the poem that are introduced, then come back, but we're never really made to understand why we're supposed to care about them. And I think that's the only problem, because the poem, they're really interesting details. And D. Coleman says, but it is kind of like a block in your neighborhood where you know of people but don't really know them. Yeah, well, I think it would work if we were surveying the neighborhood like that, and they didn't return. And then the main character ends up being this street lamp, which doesn't turn off. And there's something about that I think really works. But it's the fact that these characters are there and then come back. It's set up as if we're supposed to understand the significance of that, and then we don't. So I think that's the issue. And so I think the title is Block, and having this neighborhood sort of be playing out beneath this streetlight that sort of no one notices doesn't actually turn off. I think that's a really nice setup for a poem. I think we need to sort of think about it as I'm surveying this thing as the street lamp is always surveying this thing and letting that stand on its own without sort of going more into the other characters. I think that could work, if that makes sense. So I think that's the place I would go with this poem. It just goes on too long and doesn't have enough payoff for asking us to try to keep track of all the characters. There's too many. Okay. So that's going to wrap up the critique of the week for today. Hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. I really do enjoy looking at poems in depth with everybody, and great comments as always. Thanks to everybody who is leaving them and very active in the chat. Over the years, I've learned a whole bunch about poetry too, just by doing this. And I'm glad you all great poets out there. And thanks to everybody who shared poems today. That was Bethany Sullivan with the last set from Washington State. And that'll wrap it up. So let's see. Now this week coming up on the Rattlecast, the poet is going to be... Oops, I almost did the wrong one. That one. No. I did do the wrong one. That one. Al McGinnis. It's Rattlecast number 314. Al has been in Rattle a few times. He sent me his poems he wants to share. He's got a nice sonnet sequence, and he's got some narrative poems from his new and selected book, Fellow Survivors. Al has published a whole bunch of poems, a real veteran of poetry publishing over the years. He's going to be the guest, get to know him better. Also, the prompt for this week from Katie was to... where'd it go? Hang on. Bear with me. It's a haiku sequence. Is it just a haiku sequence? Hang on. I'm very, very slow on pulling this up, too. That has to do with the seasons. A haiku sequence inspired by the seasons. That's how it's put. Write a haiku sequence inspired by the seasons. That's your prompt for this week. We are trying to get through quick, which is why we did it, because our daughter is at rehearsal and needs to be picked up. She's got a school play going on this week, so we're going to make sure we get out in time. That's why we did a short prompt. So that is your prompt for this week. I'm still trying to figure out, let me do one thing. It's going to wrap it up, but if you want to sit for a second, I will see if I can find that poem, because I think I remember which issue it's in. So we'll see. It's driving me crazy that I couldn't pull it up. I believe it's in issue... Is that right? Let's see. It's not the humor. No. I'm not correct there. Oh, well, I give up on this poem. I'm sorry. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for being part of the Rattlecast. And maybe next week I'll remember that one. Or the critique of the week. So, see ya on Monday night for the Rattlecast. Number 314 with Al McGinnis. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.